Society.
Hello, and to the people who have come back, welcome back, and to those who are new, welcome. This is slightly different, and obviously I would recommend that you look at the videos that are connected to this, but we'll be getting into a bit of a different one. So, today we have a bit of a collection of points. They are based in a similar vein, but they do have some crossover, but at the same time they have their distinctions and are sometimes used by completely different groups. So let's take a look at the first one, shall we?
Judeo-Christian tradition.
To quote JudeoChristianValues.info and their owner and president of Envoy Incorporated, Bob Huber,
traditional Judeo-Christian values have passed the test of time. They have proven very valuable in the formation of stable and prosperous societies. As we see our nation abandoning these principles, we worry that future generations will lose the blessings that we have enjoyed. History offers many tragic examples of mass murder and injustice that arise as nations turn their back on God and His laws and embrace godless philosophies. Hundreds of millions have died in the last century alone as a direct result of Nazism in Germany and Marxist communism in Russia, China, and Southeast Asia. That is why we must do everything we can to help others understand not only what traditional Judeo-Christian values are, but also why they are so important for liberty, peace, and prosperity.
Now, if we look at this, we have to acknowledge that there's a bit of a contradiction within these statements that we can see. One example of this is that the term was in early use in the works of Friedrich Nietzsche, and that was used to describe the continuity of beliefs between Jewish and Christian worldviews, and something that would go on to be referred to as the Abrahamic religions, which showed the connection of several religions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, as well as others. We need to look at as well what was going on in this society at the time. For example, in Germany in the 1930s, especially during the rule of the Nazi Party. The censi over the course of the decade revealed that the population was 54 to 67% Protestant, 33 to 40% Catholic, approximately 3.5% as agnostic, and approximately 1.5% as atheist, leaving less than 1% Jewish. Now, I don't think I need to remind you that what the Nazis went on to do was beyond abhorrent. I mean, it was so very, very However, the issue I'm bringing up here, as stated earlier, it is a worldview held by those who are pro-Judeo-Christian values, is that to say such a Christian-containing organisation as the Nazis, and had a leader trying to create the unified Protestant Reich Church, that this is a group who turn their backs on God and His laws, is categorically false. It just proves that there is an area in which the interpretation of these laws and rules is flawed and will continue to be a problem until it is addressed. Under a similar umbrella sits the term family values, which according to the Collins Dictionary is
a political and social view of high moral standards as typical of a traditional family unit, or the moral and ethical principles traditionally upheld and transmitted within a family, such as honesty, loyalty, industry, and faith.
This term on its own doesn't sound too bad until you realise the baggage that the phrase has carried since its inception or its rise in popularity in the 70s and 80s, peaking in the late 90s and early 2000s, and then is taking a resurgence now since its recent low of 2005. Now, what is important around these times? Well, in the 1980s, there were two main countries to watch politically, to use our current neoliberal framework, and those would be the United States and the United Kingdom. During this time, there was a conservative government in each country. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were the respective leaders of these countries. Now, if we look at these elements and what was happening in these countries during this time, there was a burgeoning movement for the LGBT rights, especially during the AIDS crisis. Now, with that and a cursory look at 80s media, such as the movies and all that we can find, that there was a strong look at the concept of sexual immorality, from the absolute hunk Chad and fabulous homosexual Lord Homunculus and his gang being the rapist villains in Mad Max the Road Warrior, or the fact that Elsa Schneider from the Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade movie, a woman with total control of her sexuality, turns out to be a Nazi. Odd choice for someone with the Jewish surname for a tailor, but whatever. Or even all the complete condemnation of any woman or at least femme-aligned individual in control of their sexuality becoming sex workers. I mean, Pretty Woman is all about the male saviour from the mean world of sex work, which if we gave union protection to, it would get better, but again, we don't really need to talk to these world leaders about unions. They didn't exactly have a good run. Or the fact that being nude, not for the male gaze, or the massive lack of love interests of colour in any movie, or the majority of BIPOC roles in this time being for drug dealers when the war on drugs was probably at its worst. The use of the term family values is more accurately a use for values upheld by the ideals of white, cis, straight, conservative American dream families. As well as culturally, we can look at policy proposed during this time, thanks to gayinthe80s.com. You guys are doing the Lord's work, by the way. Everybody just check them out. During this decade, Reagan's administration deemed that there was no fundamental right to be gay, and Thatcher created Section 28 of the Local Government Act, which made it illegal for local authorities to support anything or even be misconstrued to promote homosexual relationships as a viable alternative to heterosexuality. Like, it's an alternative energy source? Or choosing salad cream over mayonnaise? And in the case of Reagan, he better read that Constitution again, because I'm pretty sure it's all about personal freedoms. Just like those that use this phrase a lot, surprisingly. Also at this time, Pope John Paul II got in on the bigotry and ordered the church to withdraw all support from gay Catholic organisations and labelled support for it evil. Now, with this full picture painted like a cultural critique themed Bob Ross, we can see that this phrase would mean, well, it was an attack on divergent families, those affected by persecution for poverty, race, sexuality, gender identity, loss, or walking out partners, and so many more. This is a cry for class warfare. No more and no less. Now, why did it come back in the late 90s and early 2000s? Easy. The more use of this phrase was a counter-cry for the equality of marriage. The choice that divergent families could have legal protections. The term has never fallen within the bounds of those fighting for social equality for all, but those who fear change in the evolution of our society. A small note that we have found as well is usually those who use this term talk about how we should protect children from indoctrination, yet are advertising to children with things like PragerU Kids, Matt Walsh's children's book, this Ben Shapiro video, Conserva Kids and the Tuttle Twins, but all those who worry about family relationships are pushing for legislation like this. So after that aside, what do we get next?
Western civilization.
Western civilization and culture is allegedly to be about the culture and created nation states of those who were once European, descended from those and colonial societies, and or were once taken by the Roman Empire. However, there are a few outliers as well, and this is what we can see here. A lot of these are countries that we could argue their country was formed on Judeo-Christian values, which, as we said before, is a load of balls. But gives us an idea of the heritage standpoint. Historically, those that are not on this list are referred to as barbarian lands in the eyes of the Roman Empire. Sadly, a group that inspires these guys a lot and takes away the idea of it being through Christendom, as this would mean that countries in Africa would be in Western culture, as they have been converted since the 1950s. Partly against their will. However, this isn't what the main use of this now works with. Unfortunately, it falls at that point on racial lines, as for a video here we can expect. So, in the modern zeitgeist, what does Western culture and civilization stand for? Well, basically, what is imagined out of a 50s utopia? Yeah, that. Western culture has been a run-of-the-mill conversation about neoliberal capitalism with typical gender roles enforced, no mention of or open condemnation of any LGBT community issues or persons, mostly white if not all, and nothing that would be considered, as I mentioned in a previous episode, degenerate in art, culture, music, media, etc. A few examples of the defenders of Western culture would be Paul Joseph Watson and his hatred for modern art, Peter Molyneux and his fear about Wonder Woman, or even the Quartering and his lack of erection about She-Ra. Now, I don't know about you, but if having She-Ra with less cleavage or acknowledging LGBT and people of colour existing is considered the downfall of Western culture, then maybe Western culture is kinda crap and isn't worth saving, because like a tacky old bridge, it's costing more work than it's worth. So to talk about this one, we have to lay down some lower levels and work our way up like a Hitman escalation mission. Sorry, I've been playing that game a lot recently. Anyway, first we have to explain what the theoretical moral fibre is. Moral fibre, by definition, is the quality of being determined to do what you think is right. So, by definition, they are more based on a personal philosophy rather than any societal basis, and cannot be applied to a wider context. The closest thing you could do is to change it into a moral framework, and from there you can make it a set of rules to assist certain groups to live by, for example the 10 Commandments. From there you will have to accept that different groups will apply these rules differently and with varying degrees of strictness. To put it as simply as possible, moral fibre, as it stands, is an individualist thing and comes from your own perception of right and wrong. Long and short, the term itself means nothing.
Come on, everyone together, full time!
Okay, no. That's a tad tongue-in-cheek. The definition we can find is based on the term societal morality.
Societal morality is a moral philosophy which states that we live in a global society with all of us being connected. None of us live in isolation. We have an effect on others and they have an effect on us. Humans are globally linked into a large macro society, and as such we are all interconnected, every person on this planet.
Now, if we look at this would make it absolutely antithetical to individualism as a mentality and philosophy to use. So, as we look at that and apply that to a moral framework, would there be anything that, let's think, Dennis Prager, for example, who has used the term societal morality, might believe that would go against the concept of a societal morality? Well, in the PragerU video, there is only one way out of poverty. I know not every video is narrated by Prager, but let's be honest, it's his fake university. He'll have looked through it at least once, and as this one came out in 2017, if he didn't agree with it, then he could have taken it down by now. Anyway, the term
Getting things without working for them is a very hard habit to break.
Now, from the stance of societal morality, would you say that it is better or worse to make someone work for basic housing, food, power, clothing, etc., or to make sure that those elements are provided for, and then from there, people can work to gain things that they may not utterly necessarily need, but something that makes them feel joy, for example, a nice painting that would make their house look nicer? The simple answer here is that ensuring basic essentials are covered is more according to the framework and philosophy of societal morality. So if that's not what they're on about, what does societal morality mean? Societal morality is in essence what these groups refer to as Judeo-Christian values, which is mainly the matter of religious Christian Baptist background views. Mainly the idea of the pre-Trump Republican Party, basically before they were saying the quiet part out loud. Anti-choice, thinly veiled racism, LGBT phobia, misogynistic attitudes, pro-capitalism, anti-social safety nets, the general gist. This societal morality, however, hits a bit of a bump, because if we look at the Judeo part of its alleged framework, we can find things like Leviticus 11, 9-12.
Of all the creatures living in the water of the seas and the streams, you may eat any that have fins and scales. But all creatures in the seas or streams that do not have fins and scales, whether among all the swarming things, or among all the other living creatures in the water, you are to detest. And since you are to detest them, you must not eat their meat, and you must detest their carcasses. Anything living in the water that does not have fins and scales is to be detestable to you.
To the right-wingers, this is part of societal morality, and you may as well be a sex offender for eating lobster on your honeymoon to Boston. Perhaps, though, we are looking at other societal moralities from cultures in the world, like to Islamic nations. It is wrong to drink alcohol, and in biblical eras it was acceptable to marry more than one person, but nowadays churches say that polyamory is wrong. So, in all simplicity, this term is another version of conservatives using the pearl clutching and hiding in the veil of religion to make their arguments and demand for control over others seem like it was based in some predestined religious morality, and not just simple bigotry. So, after all of this, I feel it would be wrong not to show the true side to this, and what is a true societal morality. The words of a healer who gave medical care to all, who deemed wealth was nothing to be proud of, and continued to show that the sacrifice that you may need to make should be at your own expense first, not someone else. If you do not believe in him, then that's fair, and in some regards I don't blame you, but at the very least, the teaching applies here.
When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a scholar of the law, tested him by asking, "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments."
So, I ask you, go ahead. Love one another. Share love with everyone, because it's not a finite resource. Tell your mail carrier you love them, your hairdresser, a stray dog in your street, anyone. Make it weird. Do it like loads. And I hope this video has helped you understand what truly matters. At the end of this, I'd really like to say thank you to Alarm O'Clock, who helped by doing the readings in parts of this. And if you'd like to check out their YouTube channel. It will be in the description under Eden's Mind. And if you liked what happened here, please go ahead and check out the Patreon link and everything that's in the link tree that will be hopefully in the description. It's that, or I've got to find it and put it back in. Anyway, have a fabulous day, and click another video. Have a little look around. See if there's something else you like. Bye!